Golgi tendon organ. So Golgi tendon organ, it is formed by the nerve endings which are covered by a connective tissue sheath, and it is placed in series between the muscle fiber and the tendon. As you can see in this diagram, that this is the muscle, the end portion, that is the tendon, and which is attached over the bone. So the location of the Golgi tendon organ, which is in between the muscle fiber and the tendon. So this is the area where the Golgi tendon organ is situated. In short, I write it as a GTO. Now Golgi tendon organ has a nerve supply also. So do remember this thing, that is type 1B fibers carry the sensations from the GTO to the spinal cord. So fibers, let me draw it over here. Fibers starting from the GTO, it carries the sensation towards the spinal segments. So that was all about the GTO and its nerve supply. Now we will focus on some of the functions of the Golgi tendon organ. Let us start with the functions of the Golgi tendon organ. So Golgi tendon organ, it gives response when there is force or the tension generated in the muscle during contraction. So the first function of the Golgi tendon organ is, that is, role of Golgi tendon organ in the powerful contraction. So let us understand with this very simple diagram, that suppose I have this muscle and I generate a powerful contraction in this muscle. So muscle tension increases, Golgi tendon organ will be activated, and when Golgi tendon organ is activated, transmission of the impulses occur. That is, sensory 1B fibers, they are present, and the impulses are transmitted from the Golgi tendon organ to the spinal segment via the sensory 1B fibers. Now in this spinal segment, it meets the interneuron. Now this interneuron, it gives an inhibitory signal to the motor neurons, which is present also in the spinal cord. So the whole procedure is like that: when there is powerful contraction, transmission of the impulses by the 1B sensory fiber occurs, and it meets the interneuron in the spinal cord. This structure is the interneuron, and interneuron thus generates the inhibitory postsynaptic potential in the neuron distal to it. That is, we are talking about the motor neuron present in the spinal cord, and it gives the message of inhibition of the muscle contraction. So this is how, when there is powerful contraction of the muscle, the inhibition of the muscle contraction is there because of the Golgi tendon organ is present. So second function of the Golgi tendon organ is the role of Golgi tendon organ in the inverse stretch reflex. In my previous video, I explained about the stretch reflex. Now let us focus on the inverse stretch reflex. So what is inverse stretch reflex? That when we stretch a muscle excessively, so instead of contraction, we get a sudden decrease in the resistance due to relaxation of the same muscle. Now this is known as the inverse stretch reflex. And what is the mechanism behind this? Let us understand with this diagram. So as you can see that I have drawn two different muscles, in which we all will consider that this is the agonist muscle and another one, that is the antagonist muscle. So what happens is, when we stretch the agonist muscle, right, when we stretch the agonist muscle, so the sensory impulses discharged from the Golgi tendon organ of the agonist through the sensory 1B fibers, it enters into the spinal cord. Now here in the spinal cord, because of activation of the Golgi tendon organ, as we have stretched the muscle, in the spinal cord it meets with the two different internuncial neurons. Now this two different internuncial neuron, one of them will stimulate the alpha motor neuron and one of them will inhibit the alpha motor neuron. So what is going to happen exactly? That when there is activation of the Golgi tendon organ, there is stimulation of the inhibitory internuncial neuron. So let us suppose that this number one neuron, that is number one, that is inhibitory internuncial neuron, So it inhibits the alpha motor neuron present over here, that is alpha 1, right? And the relaxation of the stretch muscle, it can be seen. So alpha 1, it supplies the agonist. So because of the excessive stretching, sensory fibers are coming in and it stimulates the inhibitory internuncial neuron, and there is inhibition of the alpha motor neuron. So we see the relaxation of the agonist. But on the another side, what happens is there is stimulation of the excitatory internuncial neuron, that is number 2, that is excitatory internuncial neuron. So there is activation of the alpha motor neuron of the antagonist muscle. So we see contraction over here, right? So this was the mechanism of the inverse stretch reflex, that when you stretch a muscle excessively, so after some period of time you see a sudden decrease in the resistance due to relaxation. Now how do we get the relaxation? So because of the sensory impulses are going here, it stimulates the two different internuncial neuron. One of them is inhibitory to agonist, another one that is the excitatory to the antagonist. Opposite side muscle will contract, and the muscle which is stretched excessively, it is going for the relaxation. Let us focus on the last function of the Golgi tendon organ, that is the role of Golgi tendon organ in the lengthening reaction. So as we have studied the stretch reflex, so as you can see in this flow chart, that whenever we elicit a stretch reflex, so there is muscle contraction which increases, and there is activation of the Golgi tendon organ, and which develops a spinal reaction called a lengthening reaction. Now let me give you an example of this, that in a posture of the decerebrate rigidity, there is extension of the limbs, and when you try to move the limb passively, so it becomes very difficult. Right, so let's take an example of the upper extremity, that when there is decerebrate posture, there is excessive spasticity in the shoulder extensors, right? When you try to flex the elbow, it offers a great resistance and the passive movement becomes difficult. So that is excessive discharge from the alpha motor neuron, which makes the passive movement in the flexion direction very difficult, right? But what happens when we suddenly move the arm in the flexion direction? So a sudden decrease in the resistance is seen when there is development of this lengthening reaction because of the presence of the Golgi tendon organ. And this response is known as the Philipson reflex or the clasp knife reflex. So again, in case of the decerebrate posture, the extensors of the extremities, they are under the continuous stimulation by the alpha motor neuron. There is excessive stretch reflex is present. So when you try to move the limb passively, it becomes very difficult. But when you move it suddenly, so it actually resistance will be abolished and the limb will move in the flexion direction because of the spinal reaction, that is the lengthening reaction is present, and it is due to the presence of Golgi tendon organ. So that was all about the concept of Golgi tendon organ. I hope you like this concept. If you are having any doubt related with this concept, do let me know in the comment section. Till then, keep learning, keep exploring. Do like, share and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so that you will receive a notification whenever I post a new video. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching the video till end.